Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And of course, I know that you have read that story many times. But I want to show you something that you may not be aware of. In the temptation in Luke chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, the devil taking him up into a high mountain showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment's time. And the devil said to him, "All this power will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will, I give it. If you will worship me, all shall be thine." Now, I thought one day, why was Satan offering Jesus the kingdoms of this world? Now, what Satan was saying there was this: worship me and I'll make you an emperor of Rome, because in that day Rome ruled the entire world, and the most powerful person was the Caesar, or the emperor of Rome. So he was saying, I'll make you popular, put you in Rome to rule. Why was, I kept thinking, there's something Satan was afraid of. And here's what Satan was afraid of. You remember when Jesus was born, the wise men came and said, there is a king of the Jews which has been born. And Herod had the babies killed because he was afraid this new baby king would one day take over his empire. Well, listen to this. Satan wants to make Jesus a ruler over the Roman Empire because Satan is afraid, listen carefully, that Jesus has come to set up his kingdom, spiritual kingdom, and defeat Satan, and he has come to be a king, because that was the first thing he heard out of Herod's mouth. Where is he that's born? King of the Jews. So Satan says, boy, I've got to preempt him from being king by offering him the world my way. And I want you to understand what's going on here in the temptation of Jesus. Now, in John chapter 6, verse 15, the people attempted to make Jesus king, and he went up into a mountain to pray. Matthew 27:11, the high priest asked him, was he the king of the Jews? Matthew 27:29, the soldiers mocked him and placed a crown of thorns on his head and mocked him as though he were a king. And then on the cross, Matthew 27:37, there was an inscription that said, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Now, when they asked Jesus, are you king? This is very interesting. I believe Satan was totally afraid that Jesus Christ was coming to be a king, set up his kingdom, and he was trying to preempt it somehow or disrupt it somehow in the flesh or in the natural so the plan would not come. Satan did not understand. And this is clear from Scripture, because the Bible said if the princes of the world would have known, they would have never crucified the Lord of glory. Satan did not understand the original purpose of Jesus coming. He didn't know he came to suffer as the Lamb, but one day he would rule as the Lion of Judah. The first time he didn't come to be a king, but he will come back crowned King of Kings and Lord of Lords in Revelation chapter 19. So Satan, I believe, is fearful that Jesus is going to be a king and set up a kingdom, so he's trying to disrupt the plan through temptation, through testing, and by people trying to raise him up in the natural so he would not fulfill his assignment that God had established for him. Now, the reason I'm saying that is this. According to the temptation statement, Satan said, the kingdoms of the world have been delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will, I give them. Now, one preacher said to me one time, I don't believe that. I don't believe the kingdoms of the world have been delivered to Satan. I said, well, the Bible said Satan is the god of this world, meaning not the planet, but the world system of thinking. I said, look at the wicked men in position politically across the world, and then tell me you don't believe that there's something going on. Now, when we talked about this to this man many years ago, I brought out some interesting things to him. First of all, Adolf Hitler, and I won't have time to go into this in detail, but Adolf Hitler, there was a spear which was in the ancient Roman Empire all the way from the 3rd century all the way to the time of Hitler, and it's still in the museum in Austria. And every world leader that had this spear controlled the world. And when they'd lose this spear, they would lose military or political clout or power. And it allegedly was the spear used that the centurion used when he pierced the side of Christ and the blood and water came out. It's like an occult thing is what it actually is. No one knows if it really is the spear or not, but there's a spirit attached to it, because when Hitler was at the museum in Austria and he was taking a mind-expanding drug, I think he was in his 20s when this happened, because this was written in his diary, he saw this giant beast appear at this glass case where this spear was, where he was meditating on the power of the spear, and he gave his soul to the spirit of this beast. And then in the 1930s, Hitler of course invaded Austria, and one of the things he had his troops to do was go in the museum and take the treasures out and get him the spear. And once he had possession of the spear, guess what happened? That's when he turned on the Jews, and for 7 years there was a Holocaust that took place. What is also interesting about that is there was a group of missionaries that was working in Tibet back in the time of Hitler. And they were up in the mountains, and all of a sudden these Tibetan monks are going crazy. They get up one morning and they're just acting panicking. And then the missionary said to them, what's going on here? And one of the leaders said, 1,000 of our gods have left here and gone to Germany. Well, the missionary wrote this down and found out that that was the day that Hitler was elected to power. And we also now know that Hitler had an occult element of the Nazi Party and had over 1,000, listen to this, over 1,000 Tibetan monks that he depended on to say their prayers and chants and incantations to try to give him strength and so on. So we see that Hitler was very occultic, and somehow there was a strong demonic power or prince spirit that was working in this man that gave him some form of authority in the time when he was in control. And I personally believe this is how men like Saddam Hussein stayed in power. Saddam Hussein was very occultic. He had a bone of a parrot put in his hand to try to protect him. He had people, witches, that were saying things to put spirits around him like Janine. And I remember standing up at a church and said, what we need to do, in fact, I may have said it on a major television network, I said, what we need to do is we need to begin to bind the spirits that protect him and ask God to expose him. And of course, God did that. And of course, anytime there is a major terrorist person, that's how the church should be praying for God to expose these particular individuals and the demonic spirits, not angels, but the demonic spirits that are protecting them, for God to expose those spirits. Now, let's go back to these empires of prophecy, because I want to teach a little bit on this. There have been 6 empires from Egypt all the way to the time of the Roman Empire. But Daniel, in his book, saw 4 major empires that would rule the world, because you got to remember, Egypt and Assyria were already past, so there was no necessity in him seeing those empires. He started with Babylon. And the book of Daniel reveals these 4 empires in 3 different sections. Now, these sections of the book of Daniel will deal with Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Daniel chapter 2, verses 32 through 44, which is the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 14, which is the vision Daniel have of the 4 beasts. Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 through 12, which is the vision of the 3 beasts which Daniel saw. Now, when you tie all these places together, chapter 2, 7, and 8, and you start putting the story together, you get the entire picture. Now, I want to show you something here. I want to go back to this image of metal, and I'm going to go down the head again, and we're going to be going in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 8, and we're going to show you how all this fits together, because this is very, very, very important. According to the vision that Daniel had, that Nebuchadnezzar had, that Daniel interpreted, I should say, because sometimes when I talk, I'm thinking ahead of myself, and I'll say the wrong thing. It was Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but Daniel interpreted. The head of gold was Babylon. Why? Because the Babylonian Empire had more gold than any of the other empires in history. The chest and arms were silver. Why was silver used to represent the Media-Persian Empire? Because they taxed people and demanded silver coins. This is one of the reasons that some scholars give. Number 3 was the Alexander the Great was represented by the thighs of brass. Why brass? Because brass became the main metal used in the army of Alexander the Great. Then we come down to the time of the legs of iron, which are Rome. Why was Rome represented by legs of iron? Simply because the Roman Empire had iron chariots, iron spears, iron swords, everything was iron connected to them. And you see the empire splits here between 2 legs, which is east and west, which became Constantinople, which is in Turkey, and Rome, Italy, which is in Rome. And so the empire actually split historically. And then when it comes down to the end of days, it comes into 2 branches. It comes into 2 feet, which again is east and west, and then 10 toes, which are 10 kings. Now, the part that I want to point out to you is when you read the book of Daniel, it tells us that when you come to the days of these 10 kings, that's when God will set up a kingdom that will never end. That's when the stone that the builders rejected, or that great stone comes coming out of that's cut out of the mountain, comes crashing down and crushes this image at its toes, and the whole thing comes crashing down together. So where we're going prophetically is we've already passed when the split between the east and the west. We're coming into the 2 feet, which again absolutely represents Rome, Italy, and Turkey, Constantinople or Istanbul, Turkey, and then we're going to have 10 kings that's going to come out of that. You can't make these 10 toes anything else but what it is.